started with the kind of idea. That was a few years ago now, talking to the chair of our board, who mentioned after a board meeting once, we were talking about Royal Bank of Scotland, I can't think why, and I said, no one's done that story apart from in documentaries. And she said, yeah, it was quite a time. I said, what do you mean? She said, oh, I worked for the Royal Bank of Scotland throughout that period. She said, and she was director of HR through the whole through the whole of this period. So it was a bit of a mic drop moment, if you can do that on Zoom. And I said, right, so you're kind of contractually, you had to sign an NDA and stuff. She said, oh, no, I just left. I said, so that was the beginnings of the idea that we should do it. And from then, we've been talking to Brian Cox and myself and Jackie Wiley, Artistic Director of National Theatre Scotland, about potential projects. And we knew he was really interested in the birth of capitalism, Scottish Enlightenment, specifically Adam Smith. And we were trying to work out what that story could be. So riffing around ideas with James Graham, who we'd been talking about working with each other for a while. And I talked about the Royal Bank of Scotland idea, and he said, that's one I would like to write. And then I talked to Brian Cox and Adam Smith, and we thought there was a way. And sure enough, Brian got really excited about how we might bring Adam Smith into what happened in and around 2008. Very early on, I remember James and I talking that it just felt like a Greek tragedy. It was all there for the mining, if you think about the rise of the protagonist or antagonist, but the rise of the central character, and then the building of the temple, the building of the world. I mean, Gogoburn, the RBS headquarters, Fred, in many ways you could say he built this world around him, and a world to celebrate wealth, but also to protect yourself from the outside world. There's a kind of element of a temple or a castle about it as well. And then the downfall when 2008 came along, and Royal Bank of Scotland's role as catalyst really for a lot of that. And the fact that a lot of that hubris went largely unchecked, almost completely unchecked. And it wasn't really, in lots of ways just that one person, but no one really stopped it. No politicians got in the way, no board members got in the way. There was no one really saying, enough now, Fred. And we wanted to tell a balanced version of that story that didn't just demonize one person. I mean, we went in very much with a strong rehearsal draft, but we were looking at it, we were making changes. We were making script changes during previews, and then with the preview process, we had a couple of previews, and then we had 2 days with no previews at night. So we actually made quite a lot of changes during those 2 days, and then previewing again in front of an audience. So it's a lot, because it's ever evolving. I like to work really collaboratively. I think it's important to come in the room with some ideas, but if you're working with really great actors, and they're the ones that are going to be telling the story, I try to listen to them and go, okay, so if we're running with this part of my idea, let them bring something to the table as well. And then somewhere in the middle, we co-create the ways. With this show, we had to make quite a few decisions before we started. So the design had to be signed off quite a few months before. A lot of the costume work has to be signed off. The songs all have to go through a kind of licensing process. So we maybe had a longer list of songs than we ended up using in the show. But Martin had to start with that arrangement process. AJ has to start her process on the movement work, and then Lizzie coming into the process probably quite almost after maybe the developments, but then from week 2 onwards when we're blocking, she's looking at things along with Lewis, who does the video work, about how the visual design, the lighting and the video work within the show as well, because it's such a key part of the storytelling. I think, again, with a show like this, when we've got such a brilliant creative team, multi-department creative team, sometimes it's about going, well, we thought we were going to tell that element of the story with words, but actually that can be a visual moment now. So can movement help us? If they're singing at that point, or if we're telling the story about share prices rising, are we better to talk about that? Or is Lewis better to show that as a visual? Because we all learn in different ways. So I think with this kind of material, it's trying to offer the audience different ways to understand the information rather than saying, I'm going to tell you just like that. So I like to use different ways, so whether it's music or movement or visuals, and of course, words, but offering different options within that. Quite often you want to do a lot of music up front, because until the cast have learned that music, you can't stage it or do movement work with it. So we tend to, in shows with a lot of song work, do a lot of that up front. So maybe in week 1, We'll obviously do a read through, we'll do some text work, we'll be doing a lot of music learning, and that'll give a chance for Martin and the music team to kind of really hear things out loud and go, oh, is that the right choice here, or how do we do it? And you start rough with a broad brushstroke. EG will probably experiment with the movement language, because although we've got ideas, it's like checking out what the language is, checking how it fits with this company of actors. And then for me, there's the script work in parallel with that, so we're always coming back, looking at scenes. It's about the priorities. If we feel that folks have really got a handle on that song, okay, great, let's try the movement work for that sequence. Sometimes you can't tell if the script is working until you start to slot things together, especially when there's movement and music work, because you're trying to work out, are we double storytelling here, or are we have we got it right? So it's an amorphous process, but I think by the time we get to kind of week 5, for example, broadly speaking, the songs have all been learned, the movement language has been developed and we've staged it. So that's when I'm going back in and kind of re-intentioning scene work and making sure that we've got intention going through text work, into movement, into music. Everyone works in different ways and everyone's got their own process. So I like to try and be adaptable and work with what each individual actor needs in each moment. So some actors just want to get on with it and just say, what do you think? And that's great. And then I can go, great, more of that, or what about this, or what about that? Some actors want to really go on a journey and won't maybe give you a full sense of character until much later on in that journey. And that's fine as long as you know that's their process. And then some actors just like to try loads of things, consistently try new. And again, that's great. It's just trying to tune into what the actor's process is. And then I suppose my job is then, as we move, I kind of think of it as funneling. I think start really, really wide. Every idea's on the table. Listen to try everything. Get a little bit closer to opening night. So narrow it down a little bit more. So by the time you get to kind of dresses and previews, you're really going, and then that's the point when I start saying no or yes to that and no, and be a bit more binary about it as we start to funnel towards opening night. And again, every show's different, but I think generally, no matter how, that's sort of my process working towards it, starting with anything's possible to that's our show. This is the first piece of new writing that I've directed or produced that really is about one moment in history and a satire based on that. So this is the first time I've done that with a piece of new writing. James Graham has done that many times, so I think I've tended to defer to him to say, how's that worked for you in the past, and how can we do this, and what's allowed, sort of thing. But one thing that was really key that we spoke about was we're not looking for actors to do impressions of real life people. It's about extracting the nucleus, the sort of the soul of that, finding certain moments about a real character that we go, oh, that's Gordon Brown, or oh, that's Laura Kuenssberg, rather than doing a full impression. So we were looking for a brilliant ensemble of actors, which fortunately we managed to find, who could multi-role, because pretty much all of them, apart from Brian Cox and Sandy Grierson, are multi-rolling. Almost sometimes within minutes, they're flipping between different characters. But also some of them who are playing the real characters, just extracting what that is, that energy of that real person. So we spent time, talking about that, and also working with the voice coach, Jean Sangster, on that to help vocally, and thinking about physically how they move, where their centre of gravity is, those kind of things. And then, of course, our brilliant design team, Anna Fleischel and Angelica, has been focusing mostly on the costumes. And that's that final element when you get into what would they wear? How is their hair? Is there any use of makeup? Working with the design team and using kind of shots of them at different periods, because the play charts, certainly a decade, maybe a little bit more actually. And so looking at them at different points within that, how they changed within that. Certainly Fred, looking at from when we pick Fred up kind of when he just joins Royal Bank of Scotland and see it right through to some point in the kind of future after the crisis. So we're looking at, things like, when did he lose the specs? Because he stopped wearing specs, so we presume he, either had laser surgery or had contact lenses, but it's things like that. And Sandy was really key about, at the end of Act 1, we see him remove his specs and we never see him wear them again. Making sure for Sandy, who has a different look in terms of hair and stuff, so looking at how we can make him look, and Sandy was really, again, key in that, about how he could become Fred. Yeah, I think that's a really important part of the process. But I mean, Laura Kuenssberg's portrayed in the show, and she's, been great. She, we've interviewed her, and she popped in to see her run and things like that. So I think people understand that it's not a documentary. We're trying to tell a story in a way that's accessible. Very early on, we had a conversation that we wanted to use music from around that time period, pop rock, popular music from that time period, kind of conceived, rearranged by our brilliant musical supervisor, Martin Lowe, to help us tell, not in the way that a musical does, so using the lyrics, but to create a kind of soundtrack. And the soundtrack would be sung by our Greek chorus that we've called the Furies, and they are a Greek chorus of suits. They're like bankers, politicians, shareholders, and all the other characters in the play, apart from Fred Goodwin and Adam Smith, come from this Greek chorus of Furies. And they provide the soundtrack vocally, and then we've got brilliant two musicians who create this amazing score. So James had some ideas for songs, and Martin Lowe had some ideas for songs, I did, and other members of the creative team as we started with quite a long list and narrowed it down. It's definitely not like a jukebox show where you take a collection, someone's catalogue, and then you look at the lyrics and you go, how can we tell that bit of story? It's not that kind of show. So the songs provide a soundtrack. So if this was the film, you might play the original song, for example. In our version, our Greek chorus provide that soundtrack. There's the occasional lyric that might specifically resonate with a moment, but it's much more of a emotional mood setting. And so we picked songs from that, not exactly, if we're telling a bit for 2006, that song was released it wasn't like that, it's from the period. But what popular music does, it's that thing that can just take you back to a moment where you were in seconds. And sometimes it's nostalgia, sometimes it's fear. It's like an emotional reaction that we have to certain moments in time. And I think that's what we were keen to do with the songs. Definitely hubris, which we talk a lot. The unchecked capitalism that's left to run free, and also kind of the theme of what we mean by capitalism, because one of the themes of the play is Adam Smith returning in some ways to set the record straight, and we quote Adam Smith a lot, but we often leave out the context. So a lot of things that he was saying that we call capitalism, I think, well, in the play he certainly tries to set the record straight. I think it's also a story, which is why it fits the Greek tragedy and the use of the Greek chorus of what would we do differently, and can we make sure this doesn't happen again? And I think that's part of the story, and I think if there was any takeaways for audiences, it might be about going, who was complicit? Was I complicit because I didn't do anything about it? If that was part of my lived experience, if I was living through that period, why did no one intervene earlier? Because we know that these actions had ripple effects for billions of people across the globe. What Anna has created is a real playground. It's a non-literal set. I mean, we've got things like chairs and a desk, but the actual space is very much a kind of, you could say it's a Greek amphitheatre, you could say it feels quite dark and stone-like, and within it, we're telling this story, but it adapts in different ways. But if you saw it unlit, it very much looks like it could be a kind of part of a Greek temple. And then what we do within it is incredibly contemporary storytelling, but it allows us to be really flexible. And James writes in these fabulous kind of short scenes that jump cut, to different places. So we had to find a visual language and staging language and design language that allows us to move so with such agility. Otherwise, you'd just be watching a show full of transitions the whole time. So, yeah. There's the key relationship between Fred Goodwin, I suppose, summoning his hero Adam Smith, and what that means, and who he thinks Adam Smith is at the beginning of the story, and who he thinks Adam Smith is at the end, and what Adam stands for. There's a key relationship between Fred and Rita, who they meet at RBS, and they become romantically involved, and how they influence each other within that. There's the relationship between Fred Goodwin and Gordon Brown, which is key because they were on both different kind of journeys and different kind of arcs through that period. There's the relationship between Fred and his close Royal Bank of Scotland team who were, with him a lot of that journey. And then there's a relationship between the Furies, our Greek chorus, who represent all of the people all over the world. They're representing the every person, and the relationship that they have with their kind of, I suppose, leader, Mary Mackenzie, who's based on a real person, and she kind of summons this chorus to help her tell the story. And so it's a relationship between them with Mary and Fred as well. So there's lots of different relationships happening, I suppose. When we first started talking about it and did that initial research, it felt to me like one of the most important stories of my lived experience, and one that I just felt I didn't know enough about, because I knew about Royal Bank of Scotland, I knew of the Fred Goodwin story, I knew about the banking crisis, I've watched the movies like Big Short, like many of us have. I don't think I'd joined all of those dots together. And the Northern Rock crisis, I think a lot of us remember that footage on TV when there was queues outside of Northern Rock and people wanting their money back. And I don't think I joined all of those things together, because at that time in my life, maybe I just wasn't as interested in that. I had other things, stories I wanted to tell or was interested in. As I started researching it, and I think James felt the same, it became one of those stories of why has no one told this before? This is really, really important. Again, something very, very early on in the development process was that we wanted to make sure that no one felt silly watching the show, like they needed to have knowledge before they saw the show. That's generally a bit of a pet hate of mine when I go and see a piece of any kind of art, but especially theatre, and go, I feel ignorant here, I don't know, I feel like I needed to have read a book before I came in, or have read the script, or seen a film. So because some of the stuff's quite complicated, like toxic assets, shadow banking, there's themes that we were like, we've got to find ways to make sure everyone understands it. So a friend of mine's nephew, who's an auditor, came in, who really understands all of this and works in the sector. And I wanted to make sure that there's enough for him within it, and there's enough for someone who didn't live through this period and isn't interested in finance or banking and knows very little about it. There's got to be something in it for everyone. So we had to find different ways to tell the story. I hope we've done that. Talk about it. What can we do differently to ensure these events don't happen? And do we reflect enough? Do we learn? The answer is no. So how can we change that? Somewhere to begin, somewhere to begin.